Done. So, first I want to ask you, if someone is watching you for the first time and have never heard about you, never seen you, and is still wondering who this guy is, for that one person, how would you define yourself, who you are, and why should they care about what you say?
Uh, well, I I've been a student and teacher of culture, of literature and philosophy and art for many decades,
Okay.
and that's my great passion. Uh, and by culture and art, I mean human created artifacts, ideas, literature, texts, and artworks. And I study how they interact and why we humans make them.
Okay.
And so that's my passion. I teach literature and culture at Harvard. And But I also teach in many other places,
Yeah, I know that.
including through online courses that everyone can take.
Hmm. That's one of the great major reason that I was so excited to talking with you. Like, since you teach at Harvard, I am not that much great or blessed that I could get a chance to study at Harvard, but I'm so grateful that I got a chance to conversate with you. So let's talk something about your childhood. How was your childhood like? Means your relationship with your parents and mom and dad. It's like up and down. You went from Germany to Italy, Italy to European studies, and then Harvard.
That's exactly right. You did your research well,
Yeah,
Gautam. I grew up in Germany, in Nuremberg, in southern
yeah,
Germany. And then my mother was a primary school teacher,
yeah.
worked as a primary school teacher, my father as an architect.
What about your
Um,
grandpa?
well, my grandfather, well, I have several grandfathers. One died in the war,
Yeah,
in World War II.
yeah, I studied
Um,
that.
and the other was an archivist. And actually, I wrote one book partially about that grandfather because going through archives, I realized that when he was in his 30s, he was a member, 20s and 30s, he was a member of the Nazi Party, which was very shocking to me and wrote terrible things. And I found some of these texts in an archive by accident and wrote about that period and about his history, which he kept partially hidden from a lot of people. So, yeah.
Well, you asked me about my research. I done a research like so crazy that we could even talk like 5 hours continuously. But since we do not have that much time, so we will focus up to cover major topics, all the major topics. So, what's the secret of this rote Welsh language?
Um, yeah, so that was part of that book about my grandfather. So it's partly a family history and the involvement with National Socialism in that terrible period in German history, but it's also a history of this underground language, of the Root Welsh language, as you mentioned it. This was an underground language spoken by nomads, by people who were traveling on the road without a fixed home in Europe from the late Middle Age, so for many hundreds of years, and they developed their own language. And it was a combination of existing languages, German, so this all happened in sort of German-speaking Europe, but there was also an influence of Yiddish, the version of German spoken by Jewish migrants, and other languages mixed in, but it became a kind of secret language almost, because people off the road, nomads, vagrants, they were often persecuted by the police. So they tried to stay away from the police and communicate without being overheard. So they developed this secret language. And there are also signs on the road that I still was able to see when I grew up, where vagrants would tell other vagrants which places to avoid and where to go and where you would get some food and where you might get arrested. So that was the world. And so my uncle studied this world, and
Your,
that language, and I inherited his archive and continued that work.
your uncle Gunter, I don't know am I
Correct.
pronouncing right or not.
Yes.
Yeah, so what does you pronounce it like Gunter?
Say that again.
Gunter, Gunter.
Günther. That was the name of my uncle.
Huh.
Yes, Günther.
I'm just asking that am I pronouncing it right or not?
You are. You are Günther.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So, uh, so I should not go in detail, otherwise it will get stressed a lot. I should come up at Harvard, which I am so much excited about to talk. So, how does it actually feels like to teach at Harvard?
It's like with many things. From the outside, I know a lot of people admire Harvard and it seems like this grand place, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a good place. But from the inside, and I've taught at many other places too, around the world, it's not that different, from the inside. And it's a place that has its problems, but it has its good sides. So I would say don't overestimate how it's just like many other places,
yeah.
and there are good teachers and not so good teachers, and there are good students and not so good students.
Hmm.
It's more like other places than unlike other places, I'd say.
But for a student like us, it's like a heaven for us to be at Harvard.
Well, it's good, but there are many wonderful, universities in India that I've visited, and
Yeah,
so
yeah. I will
yeah,
talk
they're
about you, India. I have done a lot of it. That you have been a great traveler. Been to Varanasi, to Jaipur, book festival.
and many other places,
Yeah,
in
yeah, I
India,
have.
yeah.
So, what actually makes an Harvard education different from any other university?
I don't even know that it makes it different. I mean, I think what what a place like Harvard, what's unusual about it is that a lot of ambitious people go there, and want to go there. So it's that collection of a lot of ambitious and talented people together. So it's what I really love is, to have friends in other departments and other disciplines and know that they are, at the top of their discipline, and I can learn from them. And I think that's also what students report, that what they learn a lot from other students. Again, this can happen anywhere, but I think if there's anything unusual, it's the sort of concentration of people. And if you look at any individual course or teachers, that you'll find many other places that have courses and like that as well. But maybe it's the collection of ambitious people that and that
Hmm.
can also sometimes be a bad thing because people drive themselves crazy and there's competition, and so it also has its bad side sometimes. No, I really think that. And so I think there are some students who thrive in this environment and others who don't, who would have been better off in a different place.
They gain some arrogance that we are graduated from Harvard.
Exactly, and they think just because of that, they no longer need to try hard and study hard because they're already at Harvard, and that's not true. You're not automatically smart just because you got into Harvard.
Yeah.
So yeah,
If
exactly.
I want to ask this crazy question, if Harvard disappeared tomorrow, what would society actually lose?
Well, I mean, there are lots of places like Harvard. And I mean, it would be, terrible. I would lose a lot of friends. Um,
Okay,
and it's, yeah, uh, you know, uh,
maybe
would be
the
too bad.
next OpenAI founder, or maybe Anthropic founder, maybe the next Meta founder.
Maybe.
So let's talk something about AI. You are right now writing a lot about AI. So what's your take on AI right now? Do you think that AI will actually replace human, or is that even a right question to ask?
I think you're, I think that you're assuming the question is no, and you're absolutely right. I don't think it will replace humans. I mean,
Okay.
I from the beginning I was very interested in AI, and I've worked with it and tried to try out different things, and it's an impressive, especially for someone like me who studies language. You know, it's so interesting to have this machine that speaks and uses language very effectively in some respects. I think my most general take is that what I find so astonishing about AI is actually that it uses language, that we share language with AI, it uses the same language, but very differently. And I think that's good because it also means there are different strengths and different weaknesses. And so that makes I think, collaboration with AI interesting and useful. If it is just replacing humans, there are 9 billion humans. That's not that useful. We have a lot of humans, but
Yeah.
what's great about AI is actually that it's different, and can do certain tasks that would take us a long time, and then it's incapable of other tasks. So that's my so far my main goal. I understand that it's not replacing humans, but it will perhaps replace certain jobs or certain tasks or certain, there are obviously lots of changes that will come that way, and we'll have to get used to that. So, but humans themselves, no, and that's not the point. That is, I think, a fear in part. I'm thinking a lot about different science fiction where, and I think in some sense, we are often too much in the grip of science fiction fears of AI eliminating humans and so on and so forth. And it's interesting that some of these science fiction stories, they are part of the training data of AI too. So sometimes you have an AI that almost talks like, I don't know, Skynet from Terminator or something like that. But it's not because it's really like that, but it's just part of the training data. And if you ask certain questions, if you prompt certain questions long enough, you'll get an answer that sounds like something out of a science fiction novel. So I think we have to be more careful about the kinds of stories we believe in.
Mhm. Maybe we need to learn the art of prompting, because
That's certainly the case, yeah.
majority of the time the AI gives us the biased answer.
Biased answer or not the answer we want. And I think it's the art of prompting. And then also, I think we need to be effective users of AI, but also be skeptical, wonder whether the answer makes sense, whether, especially if you have cascades of conversations, and sometimes AI always suggests the next step, and sometimes it's a good step, but sometimes it's not. And so I think you're so right, Gautam. The I think of I very much. I'm right now trying to write a book about dialogue. What we are having right now, the history of dialogue and the art of dialogue. And I think that we have to learn a new type of dialogue with AI. This is something we don't have a lot of experience with, because so far we've only dialogues with other humans, and now we have to learn the art of dialogue with AI.
Do you think that AI is affecting our brain evolution?
I think it is affecting our brains, and I think it's something to worry about, but also something that is inevitable. It's clear that writing, the invention of writing, is affecting our brains. These are cognitive tools, the way television affects our brains, and social media. I mean, these are cognitive tools. And so this is why they are powerful, because they're not just enhancing our physical abilities, they are changing our mental abilities as we interact with these tools. But yes, they are there by changing a little bit how we think, and that's something to to keep an eye on. And there are negative effects that if you always just outsource your thinking to AI, you'll get lazy and you won't know things yourself, and you become completely dependent on it. But if you use it smartly, critically, effectively, and in very particular ways, it can be a great tool. But I think you're right. Ultimately, it is affecting our cognition because it's a cognitive tool.
Okay. So, what makes us irreplaceable in this era of AI?
Well, I mean, just that we are very different. Humans and AI are very different. I mean, right now, the main difference, I think, the biggest shortcoming of AI is that it doesn't have a sense of the world. If you just think about what a child learns in the first year of its life, it learns about gravity and objects and human relations and all of these things, even before it even learns how to speak. uh, uh, the children, they drop things and watch things fall to the ground. That sense of the physical environment. And this is something that AI only has in a very attenuated way, in a secondary way, because the language on which it is trained has indirect sense of the world, right, of the physical world, but doesn't have direct sense of the world. This is why AI companies are trying to build world models, ways to teach AI basically the things that we learn in the first year of our lives. So it's not an embodied intelligence. Once we have robotics, that might change to a certain extent. But right now, it's so I think that, we are biological humans who learn incredible stuff about the world in our first year, unbelievably difficult things through our brains. And so AI doesn't. And that is one reason why it sometimes makes very silly, to us, very basic mistakes. It's a real weakness. While at the same time, it is great in finding patterns and incredible numbers of data and finding very particular things, making connections between things too. I mean, these are all impressive abilities. So yeah. So again, very different capacities, um, very different ways of using language, very different ways of knowing about the world, and I think that makes us very different, and therefore, not easy to replace. But also why we humans can really gain a lot from AI, precisely because it is different.
Hmm. Maybe AI is also a lot contributing in the loneliness part in the society, because today's Gen Zs and later millennial are getting means erasing the art of talking to girls, women, or anyone in the
Yeah,
society.
no, that's true. And that's one of the, perhaps difficult or negative aspects that if people rely on chatbots for, to replace human contact, that's obviously not great. Although, even there, it cuts both ways. A lot of people, when OpenAI published its first study about how people are using ChatGPT, I think it was over 25% use it to talk about anxieties the way one might use a psychotherapist. And a lot of people don't have psychotherapists, they're very expensive. And so I wouldn't say that using AI for that purpose is wrong, especially if people feel like it helps. It can't replace human contact, but it can be a source of therapy, I think,
It
if
can be a
used,
temporary
carefully.
solution.
Exactly, maybe temporary. Exactly.
Even one of my friend do have now an AI girlfriend
Yes.
whom he talks to day 24/7. So
Yeah. Maybe that's a bit much.
yeah, that's a trouble. So you have also just coined something brand new called the ad machinum fallacy.
Yes.
What is that and what made you name it?
Yeah. Well, it's a version of I've been because I teach students writing, and writing for me is also a process of thinking. This is why we shouldn't just let AI write everything. I think a lot about what gets in the way of clear thinking. And so this is why I've been very interested in different logical fallacies. And one of them is the ad hominem fallacy. It's a Latin word for attack, if you don't like someone's argument, you attack the person rather than the argument itself. And so that's the ad hominem fallacy, and it's a fallacy because if you attack the person, you maybe undermine the person, but you have actually not responded to the argument you don't like. You have not made an effective response. So. So that's why it's a fallacy, but it's very widespread, unfortunately, especially on the internet, but in human interactions too. It's so the ad machinem fallacy is a version of that, and so it says that you attack something that someone has written that you don't like, and you attack it by saying, "Oh, AI wrote that, so I don't have to bother with the arguments. I don't have to engage it." And so that's the ad machinem fallacy. Instead of saying, "Oh, this argument doesn't make sense," or "there's counter evidence or counter arguments," you're dismissing it by saying, "Oh, this was written by AI." Which is sort of like dismissing, "Oh, this was written, I don't know, if you have a certain prejudice and you say, this was written by a person X, so I don't have to take it seriously." So it's like a version of that fallacy. And I coined it because I found myself at the end of it. I wrote an essay, as you know, in Aeon, where I tried to talk about AI in literature and art. I thought it was very even-handed, but some people really hated it. They thought I wasn't critical enough of AI. And so they started to say, "I hate this." And then they said, "It was written by AI." I can assure you it wasn't. But and then I realized actually that I myself had done that too. I had gotten annoyed, and I think I was right when I diagnosed texts written by AI. I may have right, they were wrong, but we were both reactions were beside the point, because they should have responded to my arguments, and I should have responded to the arguments of a text I didn't like, no matter who wrote it. So anyway, so that's, yeah. And I think we were just at the beginning. The Pope wrote an encyclical against AI, and immediately people started to say, "Oh, it was written by AI," and part of it may have been, written by AI. But anyway, so this accusation, "Oh, we don't have to take it seriously. It was just written by AI." Mm.
Mainly, it's about I don't give a fuck what you say. I just keep doing the work heads down.
Exactly.
So, you took your first coding class at 55 and you wipe code with Claude almost daily. What has that experience actually taught you?
Oh, taking the class was really interesting because, as you say, as I mentioned, I'm very interested in processes of thinking and logic and arguments. And so I found that vibe coding is actually, not vibe coding, taking a real coding class really was sort of an introduction to engineering thinking. You have to think very clearly to code something and think through implications. So I thought it was a great experience. And I'm very bad at coding, but it was just sort of a glimpse into a world, I would say, and how you have to structure code and what it does and how it works, rather than being able to code myself very well. But then, around that time or a little after, it became easier to code with AI, and that's just been completely thrilling to me. I understand a little bit just how complicated it is, and that I myself would never in a million years be able to do it. But with a little bit of basic coding knowledge and following along what what Claude Code or other coding agents explain what they're doing, you learn a little bit about the whole process and how different parts of codes interact and how different systems interact, and above all, you're able to do things, with code. So it's been really very interesting to me as someone who's never learned how to code before. Uh, um, Learning something new is always good, whether you're 55 or 25 or 85. I can recommend it.
Doesn't it feel like boring doing coding and stuff?
It did not feel boring, but in part because it was just part of the course, and it was like an introduction to a new way of thinking. I didn't find it boring at all. Now, if I had to work every day as a coder and doing very routine tasks, I'm sure that would be boring. Just like if someone asked me to write boring things every day that I didn't care about, that would be very boring. I'm not saying all coding is interesting, but for me, and I think this is often when you learn something new, the learning curve is so steep because you knew nothing and suddenly you know a little bit, and then you learn about a world. And I think that yeah, it's good to keep trying to learn new things. And it's also I think it's a humbling experience because I'm so bad at it. And I think especially people who are, I'm pretty good at certain things and I've been teaching them for many decades, and I forget sometimes how it is to just start. And so if you start something very new and you're very bad and it's humiliating, I think it's a good reminder. It keeps you grounded.
So, do you support that code which says being a jack of all is good rather than being a master of one?
Yeah, it's interesting. I I myself, even though I focused on literature and culture and so on and so forth, which is, not everything, but within that, I have never just focused on one thing. I've always tried to do very different things. My uh, projects are very global. I travel a lot, as you mentioned. So I think I've always been more a jack of all trades than a very deep go just staying with one thing and going very deep. I think it's good to do a combination, but it's also a temperamental thing. And some people, have that one vision and they want to master this one skill really. And I think that's very valuable. Um, I temperamentally, I've always veered to the other extreme, which is maybe why I started to learn something new in my 50s in the first place.
Nobody, not everybody wants to be Elon Musk.
Yes. Well, I don't know as much, but Elon Musk, I think, is more like the doing this one thing and having a tunnel vision.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I'm talking about. He's just
Yes.
want to take humans to Mars.
Yes. Exactly.
Kind crazily optimistic person. And he
Yes.
makes thing possible, which is unbelievable for others. So you have also built an app where AI version of philosophers argue with each other, like Buddha,
Yes.
Shakespeare, and Sorcerer. So which debate is your favorite to watch?
Oh, I'm just in the middle of building this app, and
Okay,
I think having different philosophers debate is interesting. I staged a debate between Shakespeare and Kalidasa, the
Kalidas.
Sanskrit playwright, and that was really great. It brought out interesting similarities and differences. Uh, um, but I enjoy more when I debate with these philosophers that than watching the two. I don't know, that for me feels even more interesting, and I've had wonderful debates with many of my chat bots, and I would say very interesting. I had, for example, an extensive debate with the Wittgenstein chatbot, Wittgenstein, a great philosopher of language, about the way AI uses language. It's very, very clarifying to me. So I think that I, I think one reason maybe why um, the debates between me and the chatbot, the philosopher bots, are better is because you can ask more and more specific questions, and as always, if you ask more specific questions that a philosopher is a particular philosopher has thought a lot about, the answers you will get are much more specific, much more fine grained, rather than this kind of general blah 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 answers that chatbots often return. So whereas the for the prompts between philosophers, they tend to be a little bit general and you can't get as specific.
Okay. So After 3 years of actually experimenting with this all the stuff yourself, where does that leave you? Optimistic, pessimistic, something else?
Yeah. I mean, it leaves me optimistic, I suppose is the word, in that it showed me that you can do very interesting things with AI in the domain I care most about, which is culture and lowering the barriers of entry with culture. And so this is why I'm trying to work on this philosopher app, so people can, who don't know much about them, can interact with them. It seems like a great way of interacting with philosophy. That for people who, and there are many people who haven't studied philosophy, that seems unapproachable. The texts may be available, but the texts are very difficult to read if you don't have a context. So it's very hard to get into it. And I think a lot about that access to culture. And so this is why I teach these free online courses. And it's the same thing. So I think that there are cool things that that I or you or people who care about culture and literature and teaching can do with AI. So I think that I know that for sure. It's convinced me that that's possible. Now, you know, that doesn't mean that I know that on the whole AI is going to have a positive impact on all of society. I don't know. That remains to be seen. I understand, and even on teaching, I see also in my students sometimes those who rely too much on AI, they get worse and worse. I see that that's possible. So there is a bad use of it, and I don't know how we can prevent it or what the overall good and bad effects will be. I don't know that, but I know based on my own experience with that there are really great, cool things, interesting things, effective things. I think that we can do with culture. Why? Because AI is based on all that stored human material, all these texts, all these images, all these thoughts, and it's a new way of making them accessible, of working with them, of finding patterns. That seems to me extremely valuable. But that's just talking about my small domain. I'm not in a position, I don't have the expertise to make predictions about the labor market or, and I see these other worries also. So, but I just based on my experience, I found there are cool things that can be done that couldn't be done 3 years ago, and so that's what I like about it.
You could build a great app for like therapy or something, maybe to
Yes,
solve the loneliness of these Gen Zs and all.
yes, absolutely, yeah.
And you could be the next billionaire.
Well,
So, does money matter to you right now in this phase of life?
no, but it's because I have enough money. I've been very lucky with having had a job for a long time. I don't. I mean, I live in a nice house and so on and so forth. But I'm not someone who I think is particularly into luxuries or these kinds of things. I have relatively. I could live with less money happily with much than I have. I know that, so I'm not worried about money.
So, I do have one interesting question. What's the salary of a Harvard teacher or a professor?
Uh, you know, I'm ashamed to talk about it because it's pretty high, and I don't want to make other people feel bad. Now, life in the U.S. is also very, very expensive,
Yeah, yeah, I do
especially
know
in
that.
Boston. But it's a nice salary. But I'll leave it at that.
Could you give me a range like from $100,000 to $200,000 or even $1 million?
Some no. This is not no, certainly not nothing like that.
Because
Closer to the first.
I read
Closer to
somewhere
the
that
first.
it's like around $800,000, 900,000.
No. That it's also it really varies, and there are certain fields like economics or in the business school where people make really high salaries, not quite as high as that, but very high salaries. And then there are other fields like literature where the salaries are much lower. And so and the medical school, some people make very, very high salaries. Uh, um, but, you know, everyone who teaches at Harvard can have a pretty nice life. And as I said, I personally
Yeah,
I'm very happy with my salary, and I could certainly live very well and happily with less. So, yeah.
okay, I get it. So, in your Substack essay, The Future of Soft Power, you argue that America's soft power is declining. But plenty of people would say the US still dominates global culture through Hollywood, tech, and AI. What do you think? What it's slipping anyway?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think I was more responding to the current administration, the Trump administration, clearly not caring very much about soft power and reverting to military interventions instead of taking seriously that soft power can be an important tool. And I think you're right that the US still has a certain amount of it. But I've been more interested in other countries who use soft power, as you know from that article. So spent time
Bhutan.
in Korea, in Bhutan, and in South Korea, and I now use those two examples to say that to identify countries that I think really punch above their weight in terms of soft power and manage to do that very effectively. So I think I cared more about that argument than trying to assess exactly how much the US is losing or not. And I think it's a very complicated argument, and you're right. I meant more like the current administration clearly doesn't think very much about soft power now.
What's your take on Trump?
Oh, I mean, it's complicated.
Complicated.
I think that um, he has clearly a way of communicating that resonates. And I think I understand. I didn't vote for him, but I understand why he appeals to people because he communicates in this. A lot of politicians sound fake because they're very careful and they have these carefully voiced opinions, whereas Trump is this unfiltered communicator,
Yeah.
and he does that very well. I think he's declining. I believe the story that he's cognitively declining because I think his tweets are much less funny than they used to be. They are less witty. There's something that is happening. I mean, I'm not following it closely, but a little bit. But there is something in it. I think with Trump, as with other aspects of the Trump phenomenon, I think it says more about the failure of a political system, of politicians, of maybe the Democrats under the Biden administration, than it says about Trump itself. So for me, Trump is primarily a kind of symptom of problems with the way politicians talk, problems with politics in general. And so this is, I think, partly why he rose to power.
Mainly, he's also supporting the top 1% of the society of America. Or maybe we can call the top 10%, like all the richer people of America.
Yes, although it's also true that a lot of rich people are Democrats. That
Yeah.
it's not quite that simple. And until relatively recently, most people in Silicon Valley were on the Democrat side. So it's actually very complicated. Uh, um, it's true that his actual policies have made a lot of very rich people even richer, including himself. Just yesterday there is a newspaper story that last year he made $1.4 billion while president. I mean, so you can see how you can sort of see the spirit of his actions.
One
But
1.4 is way lesser than what we think. He maybe have made $140 billion
maybe
because he made Elon Musk a trillion right now.
it's true. It's
Uh,
true.
so you have also written the you have written that soft power takes decades to build but can be lost shockingly fast. If you were advising the US today, what are the first three moves you would have made to rebuild it?
Yeah. You know, and I probably said that it can be lost very fast, but I actually, now that you say it goes back to your earlier comments. You know, I realize that I'm not 100% sure. I mean, it's true because I travel a lot. When I travel around Europe, especially, there is such strong anti-American sentiments in Europe, more I think than in, let's say, Asia, but also in Asia too. And I don't know whether it's temporary or not. And so I should be careful in the way I make predictions about the loss of soft power, because I think you're right that the US still contains it, you know, has soft power left, despite maybe Trump. And maybe in some certain circles, even because of Trump, one shouldn't rule that out entirely. But, you know, I think that this is not going to be very original, but I think it's much more. I think we've seen again and again that hard power military intervention often doesn't work very well, you know, and the US has been experiencing that since the Vietnam War, but we don't seem to be learning that lesson very well. You know, that intervening, and I'm not, you know, there are also moral arguments against it, but even if we bracket them, it's not very effective. You need allies. You need to persuade people. You can't just move in and try to think, you know, problems can be solved by bombing them. I mean, maybe sometimes they can, or maybe sometimes bombing can be part of a solution. I'm not a pacifist. The world is a you know, complicated place, but I think you could say that the military failures of the U.S. maybe are due to the fact that you know, the US is a very provincial place in many ways. A lot of Americans don't travel. They don't understand how other people think. And I think that's been a big problem with American foreign policy over and over again.
Okay, great. It opens various link of my mind. So, how was your experience in India, mainly in the Jaipur Literature Festival?
I mean, India is such an amazing and country. I love going. And you're right. The first time I went was for the Jaipur Festival. I guess about uh,
20.
12, 15 years ago. I think it was 2013 or 14. Um, and I've been going back many times to Jaipur. It's an amazing place. But I've gone to many other parts of India too. Still many to be discovered. But you know, Goa and Mumbai and Lucknow, and you mentioned Varanasi and Rajasthan, traveling around Rajasthan. And I've gone to the Ajanta caves, which are just amazing in Maharashtra. And so but every time I go, I love it more. And every time I realize there's so many other places I've not been in the deep south, and that's one of the things. I've not been to Bengal, and I want to go there. Where are you based?
I am based in the middle of India, Madhya Pradesh.
I see. All right. Great.
Maybe I could have reached out to you before, so I could have got a chance to meet you. But whenever the next time you come to India, you just text me down. We will travel to the south part
All
for
right. We'll do that.
definitely. So your argument in that Jaipur succeeded because it turns literature into something lived, not just something read. Do you think the future culture belongs less to great content and more to great experience?
That's an interesting way of putting it. I think that's true. Now, you know, I should say that when I observe my own behavior, I spend often many times alone, you know, reading or you know, I playing violin by myself or watching a movie by myself. So my actual practice is very much one of individual interaction with culture on a daily basis. But I also recognize that if you turn it into an event, a festival, something that brings people together, that that's a very special experience. And I think for a lot of people, my actual practice of spending many hours alone, reading is part because I've been doing it all my life, and it's a habit and maybe a skill, or at least a habit that I've developed. That's very hard for people who grow up in a very different media environment to engage in. And so I think that the kind of festivalization of culture is, I think it's a good thing, and I enjoy it enormously. It's not the only way to engage with culture, and maybe this is also a temperamental thing, but I do think that too often culture is locked up in certain kind of institutions, in the museum, and you have to go there, and you have to be quiet, and you have to, there's only one way of interacting with it. Or in libraries, you're not allowed to talk. You can't ask someone else. It's only one certain experience. And so what's great about a festival is that it changes that, and especially with literature, because literature, in the end, you read it on your own, you write it on your own. So I think there's something very lonely about literature, and so to turn it into a festival is, I think, particularly thrilling. And Jaipur has done it better than anyone.
Great. So you have spent a career studying civilization through books, but you have also walked through places like Varanasi, where history is still being lived like every single day. Has a place
Mm.
ever taught you something no library could?
Oh, I think every place teaches me something a library can't. I mean, in some sense, this goes back to the earlier discussion about AI and human lived experience. The walking along the Ghats in Varanasi or in any other place, it's a three-dimensional experience of smells and unexpected encounters and situations, and you see the fires and you smell the fires, and it's a sensory experience, and an extreme one. In the case of Varanasi, I felt being so close to death all the time. I mean, I realized how much how how rarely I've ever even been in the presence of a corpse. Extremely rarely, and so this was a kind of really shocking, but in a good way. I mean, I realized, wow, this is very different from my other. But this is true in some sense with all places. That I think that's why travel really teaches you something that you how that books don't, and vice versa. Books can teach you things that travel probably can teach you. Yeah. So, but I think you're right. Those two, books and travel, they're very complementary, and maybe that's why I like to do both.
So, how was your experience in mainly in Varanasi? Because I visited recently Varanasi in December, and my experience was pretty fantastic over there. Mainly over that
Oh,
Manikarnika Ghat. Have you remembered that Ghat Manikarnika? Where lots of dead bodies get burned.
yes, of course. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, the whole scene on the river, I returned over several days. Um, but I mean, the amazing thing about Varanasi is that then not far in a suburb is Sarnath, and the Buddha, so
Yeah,
there
yeah.
is that, and as you know, I've been long been interested in Buddhism, so to have that important place for Buddhism right there at the same time. And then I also went to Banaras Hindu University, which is, again, a very different, created on this huge circle, like this kind of modernist idea of a university that would use traditional Sanskrit knowledge and combine it with modern science. So that also, and I spent a day there and talked to colleagues. So there are so many layers to Varanasi, and that I think something that particularly interested me.
So Do you talk to any of those students in Banaras Hindu University?
I did. I talked to some professors and to some students. Yes, I did. I did.
You have
Uh,
also read about some sort of writer over there. I forgot the name. You have done some sort of research or something.
well, I don't know. I mean, I've written on various Indian authors over the years, but with Varanasi, I think what the person you're thinking of is an American author
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
from the
American.
60s, Robert Pirsig, who wrote this bestseller. And it's an amazing book. It's actually about travel very much and philosophy. Called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's someone who had a mental breakdown and then started to travel with his son on a motorcycle through the United States, the western part of the United States. But he uses it also to think about philosophy, about Plato, about Buddhism. And so he studied at Banaras University. And so it was very interesting to go to that place because I had just read his novel for the first time, even though it's such a famous novel. I had never, or novel is not the right word, book of experience, a memoir. I had never read it. I'd only heard about it, and so it was a great coincidence in a way. Yeah.
So, which is your favorite book of all time? Is it written by
You,
you or other one?
Oh, certainly not by me. But I couldn't say actually. I mean, I think this goes back to the jack of all trades. I feel this. I think I have a genuine appreciation for many different forms of literature. Now, I can tell you which books really shaped me. There was, for many, many years, I taught James Joyce's Ulysses, and I've written about it, and that for many years that was very important to me. The work of Wittgenstein was very important to me, and I've taught that many times. But in the case of Joyce, I haven't taught Joyce for probably 15 years and have not thought about him very much. So other texts have become more important to me. These days, I think a lot about science fiction, back to the AI topic, because I realize how my own ideas about AI and the ideas of a lot of people around me are shaped by science fiction stories. Sometimes in a negative, in a bad way, sometimes in a good way. So, not because I think these science fiction texts are necessarily the greatest pieces of literature, but because they're very influential, and I think about them. I've come back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, this novel from the 19th century about an artificial creature, which is, I think, very interesting to reread in light of AI. And Mary Shelley, this English romantic writer, got certain things right that are very interesting to me. So yeah, I always read something new.
So, tell me, you need to advise one book to Gen Zs out there. So, which book you would advise? Not related to
All right.
philosophy of culture. Maybe each and everyone can understand it.
It's a hard one, and I'm sorry to say, Gautam, I'm just looked at the clock. I really need to go. I'm already late for a meeting because it's so great to talk to you. I've been enjoying this conversation and your questions a great deal. But the one book that that rules them all, I don't know. I really don't have. I don't have that one book. I think it's more. I would more say cultivate a mode of reading where you explore texts that you don't know. Maybe you find a text in a book, a used bookstore, or you come across it on the internet. It's so easy to access texts. But read texts that are sometimes difficult to read and that seem strange and foreign to you, especially texts from the distant past. It's very hard to read texts that are very old because people had a very different framework, both from your own culture and from others. And so be adventurous in your reading. I think that's what I would suggest, rather than focus on one book that holds the key to all. I think cultivating a reading habits that are adventurous. I think that's the most important thing.
Okay, so the last question is, what the best piece of advice you have ever heard or received?
Well, I think that what I just said, to keep trying out new things. I think this, it's what a lot of people say. This is not an original piece of advice, but as I'm getting older, I see around me certain people who stick to what they've already always done, and that's fine. I mean, that's fine for certain people. But I've always admired people who try out something new, who explore something new, who travel to a place they haven't
Do you have any regrets in your
encountered.
life? Do you have any
Say
regrets?
it again.
Do you have any regrets in your life?
Oh, I I do have. I mean, I have lots of regrets. Though I tried not to think in terms of regrets. There is a wonderful philosopher. I once had a conversation with, for a show, much like with you, Barbara Bleich, a Swiss philosopher, and she wrote a book that I admire about middle age and regret. And she says there's often a kind of um, flaw or false idea about regret, because if you look back and you say, I wish I had done this other thing in the past. If you had done that other thing, you would have probably become a different person, and you couldn't be the one who is now wishing you had done something else. So, in a sense, you have to kind of accept that your decisions and external circumstances, all of these factors together, brought you to the place in which you are now, and you look back. And so I think that form of regret, I wish this other thing had happened, is in some sense self-contradictory, because it would have also meant that you would now be a different person, and you would not be looking back and even having that thought. So I think she articulated that paradox, I think, very well. So the point here is, it's not to say, oh, everything was great in my past, but everything produced me. And now looking forward, I have to do the best I can with, the time that remains, given the external factors and constraints that rule all life. And so, I think the conclusion here is not to think so much in terms of regret, but to, if anything, draw some lessons perhaps in the way you look forward.